Hello, I'm Caroline Fairchild, and welcome to LinkedIn News Live, where the business conversation begins with you. There are few industries other than the restaurant industry that have been more impacted by the coronavirus pandemic. Our next guest has continued to lead the way with bold decisions to keep both his workers and his customers safe. When the pandemic was at its worst, he was one of the first to lay off workers to stay in business. Now, as restaurants open back up again, he has a simple message for potential diners: get vaccinated or eat somewhere else. Joining me now is Meyer. He is a New York City restaurateur and CEO of the Union Square Hospitality Group. He's also the founder of Shake Shack. He went to Trinity College in Hartford for undergrad. Danny, welcome back to LinkedIn News Live.
Thank you, Caroline.
It's great to be with you again. Let's start with the headlines around this vaccine. It's now required both for your employees as well as for customers who want to eat indoors. What led you to this decision at this point in the pandemic?
Well, I think you framed it really, really well, which is when we make any decision, especially since COVID started, the first thing we have thought about is what is in the best interest of our staff and their safety. Second one is what's in the best interest of our guests and their safety. And of course, the third is what's in the best interest of our business. And so this was a relatively straightforward decision. It's not a pleasant decision like so many of the other decisions we've made. It wasn't pleasant to close our restaurants 5 days before New York City shut down in March of 2020. It was not a pleasant decision to actually close our restaurants 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, which was another 10 days before New York City mandated that restaurants shut down. And it certainly wasn't a pleasant decision to let our staff know you need to be vaccinated and to let our guests know you need to be vaccinated as well. But if you've lived through this last year, year 0.5 in New York City, and you've seen the devastation and the number of layoffs that happen when businesses are forced to shut down or to curtail their capacity limits, and you realize that this time could be different because this time we actually have vaccinations. We don't just have testing, which is all we had last year. Then why wouldn't you make the right decision? I cannot imagine paying a staff member to not wash their hands in the kitchen when we know that from a hygiene standpoint, that keeps people safer. So,
well, let's speak a little bit about your staff. You said before making this decision that a vast majority of your staff members had chosen to be vaccinated, and you incentivized them to do so by even paying them to get a vaccine. But not everyone was vaccinated, and you're giving workers about 45 days to figure this out. We're about 2 weeks after you're saying that these workers have 45 days to get vaccinated. What's been the response since the mandate?
Well, the response has been very, very positive, especially from our management team, because they're the people who are tasked every single day with perhaps having to shut down their restaurant because they can't staff it because somebody has to be quarantined and they don't have enough staff members to cover it, or because they care deeply for the safety and hygiene of the entire restaurant experience. So they've been, by and large, very, very supportive of it. And I think that because the majority of our staff members have also been vaccinated, they've been very supportive as well. The reason that we gave 45 days was not just to help to inform and provide even more access to vaccinations for those who had not yet been vaccinated, but also to give ourselves the opportunity to learn how to do this the right way. It's not a flipping of the switch. Now, I think a really important thing is that while we made this decision and announced this decision, as you just said, to our team and to our guests 2 weeks ago today, 5 or 6 days after that, New York City mandated it across the entire city for all restaurants.
And well, let's talk about that a little bit, because this isn't the first time that you've preceded New York City in terms of making a decision for your restaurant. Do you have an insider's loop into what's happening? Have you been advising de Blasio or the city on any of these decisions? And why do you think you've been the first before the city has just followed suit with the same call?
I think that we've had some good fortune. So if you go back to the very, very beginning of COVID, it turns out by happenstance, March of 2020, I had 2 international trips planned. One was to go to China for the opening of the first Shake Shack in Shanghai. And the other was to go to Italy, where I went to college for a reunion. And because of those 2 trips, which had been planned since the previous winter, I had a keen watch on those 2 countries, which obviously we know that COVID began in China, and the first Western country that got hit was Italy. So I was watching those for 2 or 3 months before America was really, picking up on what was going on. And I could see what was coming. And I saw 2 or 3 cases early on where we were so scared that we closed our restaurants. And I said, I'm not going to do this on an episodic basis. So that was thing number one. With respect to the next time around, which was last fall, we had a couple cases in one of our restaurants. And it was the first time we had seen positivity in any of our restaurants amongst our staff members for 7 or 8 months. And I said, that's it. We're not going through this again.
Right.
And so this time around, I could see the writing on the wall, and it really, really felt like, everybody with the Delta variant, accelerating as it has been and had been, and the stark statistics that showed that amongst people who have been vaccinated, the Delta variant was a tiny proportion of test positivity and a zero correlation with deaths, and minuscule in terms of hospitalizations. Whereas if you look at all the other statistics, the people who have been getting sick and hospitalized and dying have not been vaccinated. So
Right.
you know what? It's an easier thing probably to do for a private business than it is for the government, because we can, if you believe in free enterprise, we can do what we believe is in the interest of our business. And as you said at the outset, well before New York City mandated this, I was aware that we may lose some staff members and we may lose some customers. But I also was willing to make the bet that for many, many more people, this might be an even better reason to want to work in a union store hospitality.
Well, speaking of that, I know I've seen previous interviews where you said that you're bullish that this is going to bring more customers, going to bring more business, but not every restaurant owner in New York City has had that same reaction to this mandate. Some are saying that this is the last thing that they need after a season with COVID pandemic, making it very challenging for them to operate. What do you say to them in terms of those who are saying right now that there shouldn't be mandates, there shouldn't be a vaccine mandate?
I just say we see things completely differently, because the last thing we need in New York is to be shut down again and told that we can only serve outdoors, and then to be told we can't even serve outdoors. And we know that this works. We know that vaccinations work. And so we've all tried to lead amazingly with carrots for a long, long time. As you said earlier, we were paying $8 per shot, 8 hours of pay, a full day of pay per shot. That convinced a whole lot of people to do it. We've been giving lots and lots of information to our teams. Now we're bringing vaccinators into the restaurants. We're welcoming people's families in as well. We're also providing bilingual support and information for people who genuinely don't have a political axe to grind. They're just afraid, or they've not been fully informed. And we're seeing a lot of people coming in and getting their vaccinations. We really, really hope that we're going to be able to get to the point where our company is even more highly vaccinated than New York City at large. And New York City at large is leading the country in terms of, certainly Manhattan is, in terms of people who've been vaccinated.
Danny, I'm going to quickly say hello to some members who are joining us in the stream for this conversation right now. We have Anup from Canada, Anup from Japan, Sue from Canada. Hi, Sue. Gianna from New Jersey, and Anthony from California. Thanks for joining us on LinkedIn News Live. I'm here with famed restaurateur Danny Meyer, talking about his decisions to make sure that his company and his employees and his customers stay safe through the vaccine, and what he sees future for the restaurant industry in New York and beyond. So if you have any questions, let us know in the stream, and we'll get those questions answered right here on the show. Danny, I want to go back to the decision that you made right at the beginning in the heat of the pandemic to lay off workers. It received a lot of negative press. People were saying that you were laying off people at a time when they really needed jobs, but you framed this decision as you can't if you get closed down, if the business goes away, you can't hire anyone back. Now people are saying with this vaccine that they're going to close down. Their business will not survive if they require the vaccine. How are those decisions differently in terms of business owners thinking about laying off workers versus requiring the vaccine at this point in the pandemic?
The best answer I can give you is that anyone who really thinks they know what they're doing during COVID is full of it, starting with me. I think that every single week since this thing started has provided a whole new set of unknown issues and taken us down decision paths that we've just never seen before. And so all I can say is that at every step of the way, we've really relied on the compass that I mentioned earlier, which is what do we think is first in the best interest of the people who work in our company from a safety standpoint and of our guests and our community. And ultimately, we think that that's in the best interest of our investors. And the reason that there are 26,000 restaurants in New York City that are all completely different is that every restaurateur has a different way of doing business. And I would never, ever, think that I should or could tell another restaurateur how they think. I'm just saying that from my standpoint, the safer we are as a city, the greater the chance that we're going to get this thing in the rearview mirror. And the more we keep rolling the dice on this whole thing, I think we just prolong the danger for everybody.
Well, of those 26,000 restaurants that you just mentioned, thousands of them had to close permanently because of the pandemic. What are you hearing from the restaurant scene now in New York as Delta variant cases continue to rise? Is there worry? Where is the precaution barometer in your mind in terms of just the sheer fact that more restaurants may have to close?
I think the concern is very, very real. Business right now is actually very good in terms of guest demand. If you walk down the streets of New York and look at the outdoor dining, you're going to see places that are full of happy people. They are obviously not wearing masks while they're eating and drinking because you can't do that. And I think you would find a very, very robust feel. Now, in the backdrop, there's no question that every one of us has PT, whatever it's called, post-traumatic stress disorder. And it feels like, what's next? Where's the next shoe going to drop? We've all been so excited about this upcoming fall because we've been able to look forward to, live performing arts coming back, Broadway, off-Broadway, Lincoln Center, Carnegie Hall. We've been able to look forward to schools reopening. We've been able to look forward to just that, really wonderful, uplifting feeling when tourism comes back to New York City. And so I think that as good as things feel on the streets of New York this summer, I think it would be disingenuous to not say, is the fall going to be what we hoped it was going to be? And again, this is why I know how to put this in the rearview mirror, and that is by having people vaccinated. And that's why, we're reading in the news today that any moment now the FDA is going to approve a third booster shot vaccination, or the CDC is going to approve that. And I'm pretty confident that any day now, the FDA is also going to give the full approval to the actual vaccination that millions and millions of Americans have had because it works. It's keeping people alive.
Well, Danny, I agree with you mostly that it's hard to eat and drink with a mask on, but I will have to say we did have an entrepreneur on the show at one point who did create one of those masks that you can fit a straw in. I don't know the state of that business, but we should definitely look back into that to see as Delta variant cases continue to rise. Speaking of Delta cases, I did want to go back with you. We had you on the show in April of 2020, right at the heat and height of the pandemic in many areas of the country. And I asked you what the long-term implications were going to be for the industry. And you equated it a lot to what Major League Baseball was going through. Let's take a look.
We're going to have to change our business model just to get open. Think about Major League Baseball and how some people are discussing how the first thing, once they decide that it's safe for teams to get back to spring training, which is, it's going to take a month just of that, then they're going to have to figure out, can we play a month of baseball to empty ballparks and have you watch it on TV? Our version of that is not dissimilar. We're going to have to get our own spring training. We're going to have to recruit our teams back, figure out how many of them we can hire back with a model that plays to empty dining rooms.
All right, Danny, where are we right now in that spring training? Are we past it? And then going back to just what your transition was like, getting workers, getting customers back into restaurants, what was the most challenging part?
The most challenging part was shaving my mustache, which thank goodness I did. You know what? It's actually true. I sometimes feel like we are in spring training this very summer. And, this gets to a whole other topic, which is that a huge number of people from the hospitality industry who left when they were laid off from their jobs throughout New York City and this entire country have not come back to the industry yet. I think they will. But I think in the meantime, restaurants who have just incredible demand from their guests who have this pent up desire to come back out to restaurants and eat have not been able to fully staff their restaurants, and even if they have, they're probably staffing it with people who did not work in the restaurants a year and a half ago. And so restaurants are like a well-oiled machine at their best, but it takes time to get that done. And I can tell you from our own restaurants that while I'm really, really proud, and I cannot tell you how hard everybody's working to try to provide a really uplifting experience, because this is the reason restaurants exist, especially today. This is why restaurants matter so much today, is because people need a hug. People have been lonely. They've been, they've been living the weirdest life of their lives for this period of time. And restaurants are supposed to be a place for people to come to feel better. And I think what's happening, sadly, is that a lot of restaurants are not playing at their mid-season peak capacity right now, and it's a challenging moment for people. It's like,
right,
we can do better, and we will.
And a lot of that has to do, like you said, with just the challenge of getting workers to get back and get interested in coming back into the industry. I actually want to bring up a quote from Peter Hoffman. He's a famed restaurant operator. And he said in the New York Times just this week, the changes restaurant owners must make will succeed only if diners support them. If restaurants are to raise their wages, grow their staffing rosters, and improve their cultures, diners will have to pay more to dine out and should embrace those increases as expressions of their own values. I have faith diners can accept these changes gracefully, even if it means going out to eat less often. Do you agree with Peter here, Danny? Do you think that this part of this equation is customers changing their relationship with dining and what that looks like?
I wholeheartedly agree with Peter. And I've actually been saying this for quite some time, which is, as successful as our industry was in the last 20 years, 25 years at convincing and educating and showing restaurant goers why it's worth paying more money for a vegetable that was raised properly, or an heirloom tomato. And we've been amazingly successful at helping people understand why it's worth paying more for beef that was raised without antibiotics or growth hormones, et cetera, et cetera. We've done a terrible job of really trying to explain to our customers why you now have to pay for people. And it's the people equation in restaurants that has too often been kind of tamped down, because with declining margins, the rent goes up when it goes up, the food cost goes up when it goes up, the cost of linens goes up when it goes up, healthcare goes up when it goes up, and the people who have taken it on the chin are the people who work in restaurants. And restaurants are highly competitive. Menu pricing is highly competitive, but it's going to take a combination of restaurants and media and the public to understand that we have to start paying for people, or what you're going to find is that restaurants, as we know them, full service restaurants are going to just decline in terms of service and hospitality capabilities. And that's not going to be good for anybody.
And Danny, are you bullish that this pandemic hasn't awakened the public in terms of just the critical role that restaurant workers play? At certain times, they were considered frontline workers during this crisis. Are you bullish that this pandemic is going to change how we view the industry so that these workers do have better paying jobs, better benefits, a better sense of life?
Well, it's playing out right now because the labor shortage is actually dictating that people are getting paid more money, because it's not just restaurants. It's truly, in my opinion, every business that cannot work remotely has a shortage right now. So if you were able to work remotely, you were probably not laid off from your job. But if you're in the kind of job, whether it's restaurants or hotels or entertainment, or you're a driver, or you work in a manufacturing plant where you could not do your job remotely, you had to go there, you had a stark choice. Perhaps you were laid off. And if you were laid off, you had a year and a half to start to think about how you want to live your life. You also had a year and a half perhaps to get another job in another industry that didn't make you stand on your feet or sit behind the wheel of a truck all day or whatever. And so these industries, as they try to come back right now, are having to pay more money. And so whether or not I'm bullish is almost besides the point. It is happening right before our eyes. That's a good thing, ultimately, that people in customer-facing businesses where you cannot work remotely are being paid more money. That is going to lead to higher menu prices. And so what Peter's saying in his article is happening right beneath our eyes. I think what I would like people in the public to understand, and if you've flown on an airplane or even read stories, you can see that there's a certain behavior and a lack of civility that is now being shown to people. I've seen passengers on airplanes misbehaving in ways I never saw before with the flight attendants. I've seen guests in restaurants doing that with bartenders and waiters who are trying really, really hard to do their job well. And we've just got to all take a deep breath right now and realize this will get back to a steady state, but it'll sure help if everybody plays their role in it.
Well, Danny, you've said many times on this show that you're never going to give another restaurant owner some advice, but I do see some restaurant owners in the stream right now. What is your message to them at this point in the pandemic? If you could, snap your fingers and have restaurant owners make decisions or do something right now that you think will really change the way that we see, let's talk New York specifically, what happens moving forward, what would you say to them?
I would say I want every single restaurateur to write their senator and their congressman, not tomorrow, but today, and say, pass the Replenishment Act for the Restaurant Relief Fund. I think it was an amazing thing that Congress passed the RRF, which was so much more effective than any of the other earlier rounds of restaurant relief. And unfortunately, the government ran out of money after servicing 1/3 of the applications, leaving 2/3 of all independent restaurants in the cold with mountains of debt from the last year and a half. And we are close. We have bipartisan support for this, but not enough just yet. And I think if every restaurateur writes their senator and their congressman, we have a fighting chance to have this industry have the financial backbone to get back on its feet.
Well, Danny, I always enjoy our time together here on LinkedIn News Live. And as someone who's enjoyed many New York City restaurants since I've been back here the last couple of months, I want to say thank you for everything that you've done to keep the city safe. And I know I speak for the stream when I say thanks for joining us on the show.
Thank you. Always a pleasure, Caroline.
That was Danny Meyer talking to us about the path forward that he sees for the restaurant industry and why he made the decision just a couple weeks ago to require both customers who are eating indoors as well as employees to be vaccinated. I'm seeing a great conversation about this very topic right now in the stream. If you want to continue the conversation, be sure to check out the news module to the right of your LinkedIn feed. Or if you're in mobile, you can click into that search box. Tomorrow, my colleague Andrew Seaman will be with you at 11 Eastern. He's speaking with Sarah Johnston on interview tips and best practices for finding your dream job. You can catch that interview on the LinkedIn news page at 11 a.m. Eastern. I'm Caroline Fairchild. Thank you so much for joining us.